have informal conversations during that training, and we center on unscripted conversations, kind of like what we're doing right now, right? Where people can feel okay if they say, I don't know, or I just noticed that I said, and gosh, is that okay, or should we edit it out? The idea is to build trust, safety, and comfort for people to ask questions, to not know the answer. And when that happens and a personal relationship starts to form, leaders then begin to model inclusive behaviors, and that's where we see the change and the impact carried out through the rest of the organization.
Are you looking for ways to shorten your marketing learning curve and help your organization survive and thrive? Welcome to Relish This, the Purpose Marketing Podcast, a show for purpose-focused leaders who want to use marketing techniques to fuel their organization's growth. If you're a returning listener and you haven't subscribed already, we'd love to have you. Also, please consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Now here's your host, author and marketing specialist, Stu Swineford.
Hey, Relish This listeners. My guest today is Michael Rolph, and he is the founding partner at New Sincerity, which is this really great organization out of the Bay Area that helps people with DEI training and awareness and culture building and all of those fun things that I know everybody out there is really interested in learning about these days. Michael and I met through Lunch Club, actually, on a call a few weeks ago. And it seemed like just a perfect fit for the show because there's so much traction and so much buzz right now around getting culture right. Everything from hiring to retention to getting stakeholders and your donors on board. It all comes down to culture, and DEI is kind of the foundation of that. And this is diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Michael's just a really great guy. He has a super cool background, both in nonprofits and tech, as well as finance. And he has a degree in psychology. So he is dialed into this challenge and helps people figure it out. We talked just a ton about DEI in general and how important it is to not necessarily worry about getting it right immediately, but just getting started is so important. I encourage you to listen to this one with all your heart because Michael's really pouring it out there and really helping companies and organizations thrive and just get better. And I loved this episode, loved this conversation, and I hope you do too. Here we go. Michael, how is your day going today?
It's going wonderful. How about yourself, Stu?
It's going well. We are recording this in late May, and it is currently snowing at my house. So there you go.
Wow.
Pretty standard late May activity, actually. But people find that amusing. You're in the Bay Area, correct?
Oh, yeah. Home base is San Francisco, and it's a sunny day for us here, which is nice. The fog starts to come in the summertime, but right now the sun is shining out there.
Yeah, I ran the marathon in San Francisco in 2011, I think. And at that time, it was in late July, I believe. And it was, it was a great day for running, but it was definitely not a Colorado day for sure.
Yeah, that's the weather in San Francisco is funny. My wife always says that she wants a proper summertime, so she likes to travel over the summer. And we've got an 11-year-old girl too, so we try and get out, and get a little camping, and find some sunshine.
Fantastic. Well, it's a beautiful area. I was able to visit there last fall. Actually, I have a friend who lives in Berkeley who used to live in the Boulder area. And when he moved out there, I try to get out and see him on occasion. And we were able to go to the Muir Woods and just have a very nice time there in the Bay Area, and then went out to the Winters area actually to visit my wife and her family. She was out there visiting them, so I met them out there. So
nice.
It was a fun kind of Southern California, I guess they call that the Central Valley trip. But it was a good time. I enjoy coming out there.
That's nice. Yeah, that's nice. I worked at University of California, Davis after graduate school, so I know that Central Valley area really well.
Yeah, it's beautiful out there. So tell us a little bit about New Sincerity and what you're up to in the DEI space.
Oh, thanks for asking. Yeah, I mean, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to chat with you and with the Relish This community. I have a background in the nonprofit world. I have some executive leadership experience with a nonprofit based in San Francisco. Although the heart of my career is really kind of both in inclusion and in tech. And New Sincerity is a collective. It's a partnership that is working on building dynamic and high growth inclusive company cultures. And what it really is for people that know a bit about the diversity, equity, and inclusion space is an opportunity to understand how culture and identity impact the of course the well-being of folks at work, but also the growth and the way that the organization can thrive. Everything from recruitment and retention to leadership development, and then also as a big part of what your agency does, just thinking about how the brand intersects with cultural factors out there in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic of discussion that you hear more and more about these days, and so it's really great to hear how there are little businesses popping up all over the place that help people kind of navigate the space, because I think that it's a really important piece that has been missing in the entrepreneurial and just business world for quite some time, and so it's great to see people putting an attention to this. How did you get into this line of work?
Absolutely, and it's great that you're hearing and seeing some awareness there as well. I've been in. It's hard to tell exactly. I studied Black Studies and sociology in undergrad, and I have a master's in multicultural counseling from many years ago. So it's hard to put an exact number on when I started to do this work directly, but I probably would say it's been about 12 years or so in 2000. And I first launched New Sincerity as a digital media startup in 2017. The idea there came out of some work in grad school that was centered on bias and really trying to understand where bias was coming from in the broader culture.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been in tech for 20 years, and the intersection between my work in tech and leadership, I was the CMO of a cybersecurity company, and before that, I ran a digital agency. But the intersection between culture and leadership was kind of inspired by a lot of data that was being created by some of these big consulting companies, right? Like McKinsey and Deloitte
Mm-hmm.
and Accenture. They started to look at how business growth was being slowed down by very real human problems like pay equity and lack of representation of people in color and people with different identities in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And so I built New Sincerity, and we drove a lot of folks to the original content. Had about 175,000 followers across social, but didn't find a revenue model that allowed that to work. So after leading some internal DEI projects in both my nonprofit work as well as in the cyber startup, I saw a chance to build kind of a collective of partners. So myself and primarily women of color have a kind of a collaborative co-training model, and that's how we do our work with clients. And that's this idea of intersectionality is something that's kind of fresh in the DEI world, and we're having some really good results.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. How do you facilitate these kinds of conversations when a client or an organization comes to you and is seeking some help in the DEI space? Where do you start?
It's a great question. It's a great question. I think the foundation of our work is on building authentic and trusting human relationships. And I think I mentioned I have a counseling degree, so I've worked in tech for many years, but I have a dual master's in MFT, which is the psychotherapy side of that work, and then also in
Mm-hmm.
career development. And so I've been able to bring together this tech startup background along with the very human centered work of working with people and understanding the kind of that emotional mindset. And the way that we begin conversations is really about kind of open inquiry, right? And you're an agency leader also, and you probably are very accustomed to asking lots of open questions and doing a lot of listening. And I have a strategic framework, right? I have questions that I really am curious about, but when clients are leading, I get a sense of kind of goals and understanding, and then we can frame engagements around where the leadership in the organization is at, and then do some strategy road mapping, training, and coaching out of that.
Yeah, that's great. Do you coach with leaders specifically, and then trickle that down to the remainder of the team, or is it really more of a bottom up kind of approach to building that culture? What seems to work best in your experience?
That the data suggests that change when it comes to inclusion, which is really about organizational change, it's effective when there's visible buy-in from senior leadership. So
Okay.
our work really does begin with the leaders. The One of the things that we're trying to accomplish is to move folks away from the idea of needing to be an expert in DEI, because what I found is that if people think they're concerned about getting terminology right,
Hmm.
if they're considered really focused on the language, it doesn't inspire open and trusting conversations. So we use a train the trainer model quite a bit. We'll work with leaders and we'll do, for example, a leadership training, and we'll focus on a topic like psychological safety, for example. But we have informal conversations during that training, and we center on unscripted conversations, kind of like what we're doing right now, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
people can feel okay if they say, I don't know, or I just noticed that I said and gosh, is that okay, or should we edit it out? The idea is to build trust, safety, and comfort for people to ask questions, to not know the answer, and when that happens and a personal relationship starts to form, leaders then begin to model inclusive behaviors, and that's where we see the change and the impact carried out through the rest of the organization. So it's not a lot of the DEI training right now is what we call performative. We're seeing organizations and leaders sometimes saying, "Hey, let's do that DEI training, and we'll work on this topic of unconscious bias, for example, and then gosh, I'm sure glad that we got that done. Now we can move on to the core business objectives." And the data that I bring into the conversation shows that when inclusion is a part of all business objectives and values, the we see growth across the organization, and it doesn't need to be simply a training exercise, but it can be something that's embedded into stand-up meetings, for
Right.
example,
Right.
or for regular check-ins over email and Slack. So we're about embedding it into the business, and that's where we start to see the change.
Yeah. When it becomes a true kind of a cultural adaptation,
Yeah, exactly.
you really, that's where you really start to see those key benefits. So we do a lot of work in, as you might imagine, in marketing strategy, and one of the exercises that we like to help our clients with is really a values, vision, and mission exercise, where
Uh-huh.
we start with kind of the core values and then build out what the long-term kind of aspirational future state might look like, which would be your vision, and then kind of bring that back to earth a little bit with the mission, which drives the kind of day-to-day operations. But if all of that is built upon this set of core values that we've established first, it tends to have a much stronger foundation on which to grow and to anchor, I guess, everything that one is doing within that organization. It tends to be really effective. So
Yeah,
it sounds like
absolutely.
that's a similar kind of approach to that.
Yeah, absolutely, Stu. That makes so much sense. That makes so much sense. I think that so we have an engagement that's an inclusive principles engagement, and honestly, it would wed with your values and mission engagement really well, in that we're not trying to invent something new, or certainly not create lots of cycles of new work for our clients,
Mm-hmm.
because we know that everybody's strapped for time, especially in the nonprofit world, right? There's just so much ambition to create change and to serve the client that oftentimes nonprofit clients that I've seen, you probably have as well, they just bite off more than they can chew. And there's a
Right.
challenge with getting projects across the finish line. So an inclusive principles engagement would align with you working on values and mission by simply asking a few more questions about how both customers, clients, the board, all the different stakeholders, is there aspects of lived experience, culture, and identity that are impacting the folks that either we're serving or that are within the organization that are doing that work. And we have to be who we are as human beings at work. So culture and identity is always a part of who we are and how we work. And when we get curious about how that intersects with the mission, people start to get to know each other better. And that's where we get this idea of empathy. And empathy is just it's a great company value, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. I've heard you talk about relationship building quite a bit, which is essentially what we think marketing is basically relationship building at
100%.
scale. And this seems like there's a tie in there, right? Where it's really about trying to create a solid foundation and a healthy framework where conversations can start to happen. And I'm wondering, I mean, we see this happen in the values, vision, mission exercise a little bit as well from time to time, is people start to get a little bit more concerned with getting it right than with getting it started. And I'm wondering if you see a similar breakdown with people who may be struggling with this and feeling like um, either the investment that they're making in time or investing in your services is not working. Is there something like that that people can change the mindset about in order to kind of approach this in a different way?
Yeah, that is so smart, Stu. I made a note of this idea of changing the mindset because it really aligns with where we've seen success. There's this idea of implicit bias, both in terms of like culture, but also just how our brains work, right? People have a sense or they think they know what DEI work is. And I know cognitively when I begin conversations through, a discovery call or when we begin an engagement that everybody in that meeting or on that call is going to have an idea of what they think is going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're a marketer and you're trying to engage and persuade, and I'm trying to do the same thing, right? And if I think about, hey, how do I drive engagement? If I drive engagement by reframing this discussion, and the way that I do that, one of the first tactics is to start sharing business data
Mm-hmm.
from sources that my audience really didn't expect me to bring up. They didn't expect me to start mentioning data from MIT Sloan that talks about the financial impact of toxic corporate culture on top and bottom line revenue. And when I start talking about business, then all of a sudden folks like COOs and CFOs, they lean in and say, okay, what is, because they really, I mean, I don't want to be crass, but they probably were multitasking if we're on Zoom, right?
Sure,
They're like,
right.
I got to check this box. And then they're like, okay, so what is this guy going to say next? And I'm really trying to earn attention
Hmm.
by speaking to the language of everyone in the room. I lean into my background, working with VCs, launching a startup and running a digital agency, and then working in highly matrixed environments in the corporate world as a way to show connection and empathy for senior leaders that are thinking, hey, Michael, I really want. I believe in what you're doing, but they're thinking to themselves, we just don't have time for this. And
Hmm.
what a lot of practitioners are saying, honestly, we don't have time to ignore it
Right.
because it's oftentimes there are people that are struggling with managers that have low levels of empathy, for example, but also we have data that show that employee engagement is extremely low. And engagement is tied to productivity. It's also tied to employee turnover. And that's when I start to bring those elements into the conversation, people say, okay, I think there's something new here in this DI conversation. And if I can earn their attention and bring the engagement of senior leaders in, then they start to invest personally in the work. And then that's when the magic starts to happen.
Yeah. It's really funny how that works. We have done a lot of work in the environmental space over here at Relish Studio, and we hosted a kind of a get together with several environmental groups and even politicians in the
Oh,
local area.
fantastic.
And one of the interesting things that came out of that was how to how you just have to reframe the conversation depending upon your audience. And so, speaking with, progressive politicians about climate change is a different conversation. And when you frame it differently from when you're speaking with perhaps someone who's more, on the conservative end of the spectrum. But essentially you can figure out how to create interest and get the end result that you're looking for. You just have to rejigger that conversation, and instead of coming at it from the we want to save the planet, or we want a nice natural spaces for
Yeah,
our kids
100%.
and grandkids, if you reframe that as an economic conversation, then you can kind of gain the attention of this group that typically is less invested in having that kind of conversation or that discussion.
It's so true. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true, and we can do that authentically, right? Like I
Mhm.
think about if I think about kind of the relish, the clients and folks that might be listening today. Maybe there's an executive director, and she has a lot of different stakeholders. She's got the core team that's delivering the work. There's the folks that are being served, right? And then
Mhm.
there's the fundraising and the board element. And then there's larger community and partners. There's all these different stakeholder groups. And she needs to think about messaging that will engage all groups and what the core goal of that message is.
Mhm.
And there's this idea of code switching that we talk about in the DEI world, where oftentimes folks that are underrepresented within organizations they really have to adjust and switch how they communicate and engage colleagues because they are oftentimes the only one within the organization. And there's a lot of emotional labor that's required to do that. It can be extremely exhausting.
Right.
It's something that I have empathy and awareness of, but as a cis white straight male leader over 40, I realize that I have every expression of privilege that exists in the workplace.
Yeah.
And so when I'm doing this work and thinking about everybody that's in the room, I just lean into being extremely vulnerable in the way that I'm sharing these ideas, because because modeling psychological safety and communicating, for example, the fact that I'm a part of the macro culture, right? There's
Right.
all sorts of cisgender straight white men within this organization. Um, I don't have to code switch to be able to communicate my ideas, to exist, to share influence and to try and move my goals ahead. And that expression of vulnerability and that empathy, um, oftentimes it's very uncommon from straight white male leaders, and we can be vulnerable and express empathy. And honestly, we end up getting more buy-in and engagement from our team when we do that. So there's the benefits of a leader kind of being vulnerable. They translate to things that we want to see as a leader: productivity, greater connection to the mission, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too how more and more businesses are starting to lead with culture in terms of even in their marketing. So the language around marketing has started to change in some cases, where it's more about the experience of working with this team is going to be the thing that you take away from your engagement with with an organization. And and with that comes hiring, and so there's just everything is all kind of part of this ecosystem that we that we live in, and it's just interesting how so many things that you wouldn't expect it to matter, or you wouldn't expect that to be have a great impact, can across the board. So bringing in a DEI expert, or doing the work internally, if you're seeking to do it internally, can have really big effects in places that you never even thought of experiencing those effects. So
Yeah,
it's
it's so
really
true.
cool.
Yeah, it's so true. We've built very kind of shorter time frame and more affordable engagements for nonprofits centered in a couple different areas. One of which is looking at board diversity,
Mm-hmm.
because oftentimes there's a difference in prioritization of values on the board. And it can be challenging because board members, sometimes they have personal goals or change that they'd like to see in the world that isn't as directly related to the mission of the nonprofit. So my role there oftentimes is partially strategic, and then partially it's really about coaching and collaboration. And I lean into my work in experience and mental health to get people back to shared values, and then get them back to maybe values that you created at Relish, to remind them, hey, this is why we're all here.
Mm-hmm.
Fundraising is a core part of our mission. How we advance that mission, and then understanding the cultural context of bias systems in America, that's there too. And how do these things all coexist? So it's work that I do with nonprofits that takes what for many people is like, hey, this is going to be a very disruptive engagement. A lot of small organizations, nonprofits tend to put it off, hoping that things will work themselves out. But unfortunately, when that's festering underneath the surface, it kind of does harm to everybody, and that's something that we try and peel back the layers and rebuild that trust.
Yeah. When people start to engage in a process, when they've either identified that this is something that they would like to change about their organization, or something that has been brought to their attention that they should start to address, where do you recommend? And not, obviously there's probably not a single answer for this, but where do you recommend people kind of start with their exploration of either bringing in a DEI expert, or trying to figure some of this stuff out on their own?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's a great question. There's a couple different ways that we begin our work. Oftentimes, an organization will approach us and say, "Hey, this is what we think our need is,"
Mm-hmm.
and does your firm do that work, and how long and how much? And when we do discovery, oftentimes I can make a recommendation and say, "Hey, maybe before." I'll give you an example. I had a client and they try to do an internal survey to just assess needs and current values and sentiment around inclusion and belonging. And they weren't sure how to read the data that they had.
Okay.
And what I realized is that the employees felt a little bit over surveyed. The questions, the way that they were asked, they were so broad that it didn't provide for a lot of information, and really there was a need for more inclusive leadership training for leaders to actually think about how to create trusting relationships with their team directly. So we were actually able to frame an engagement that was a little bit more straightforward and met more of an immediate need. And because it was a leadership development engagement with an inclusive foundation, but because it was really about helping young and junior leaders understand how to do things like performance reviews. The senior leadership across the organization, the COO especially, said, "Oh well, gosh, if leadership development is something we need, I thought this was going to be this DEI work. But if this is leadership development and we can wrap that into DEI, then we have more budget available." So
Right.
there was a reframe there that allowed especially these younger leaders that have been elevated without training, and that's very common. They do a good job, and so they say, "Hey, congratulations, you've got three people on your team now."
Right.
And they're early stage in their career, and they're feeling proud and excited, but they're also like, "I don't know how to run a meeting."
Right.
And so we're like, "Hey, let's do some of that foundationary work." We do a lot of video based training, which is super helpful. And then we try and create also, we have these shorter training experiences that allow for more touch points throughout the week so that people don't feel that training is a burden, but that it becomes additive. And I think this is something that I've just taken from my research in education is that, hey, if we ask people to set aside an hour and a half for a training exercise and to go really deep, oftentimes they're just feeling the press of their calendar to move on to the next thing, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not as engaged in the work. But if we sneak in a little lunch and learn exercise or a lightning talk at the beginning of a meeting, for example, then we start to help people see, hey, this is how inclusive leadership training intersects with the next thing that's on my list.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like the idea of kind of wrapping in some additional pieces into that training where I think that a lot of people probably come into DEI training from the perspective of, oh, they think something's wrong with me, and that's why I need this work done.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and reframing that as like just, leadership training or team building training or something like that, that it gives them additional tools that allow them to see how DEI can be applied in their regular, workplace, just as part of their regular activities, and how it all fits together. I think that seems like it's a really cool way to get people engaged and not feel like this is something that's wrong with them.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. I mean, you're reminding me of what the DEI lead at eBay, Barak Alian, said in a recent article. He tries trying to move people away from this idea of DEI experts,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a big believer in that approach as well. I think he's really onto something. If we get people thinking that they don't need a specific title, role, or established expertise in inclusion, they get freed up to get curious about their colleagues on a human level. And that's really what we're going for, right? If people are curious about identity at a human level, for example, I happen to feel comfortable talking about my culture and identity and my awareness that, hey, I have privilege as I move through the world, but I also can move on from that sharing and then ask people about what their experience was. And that can be really simple. It can be as simple as asking about one's weekend, but then asking a couple follow-up questions to encourage people that share a little bit, right? Like I'm a parent, and for some of my younger colleagues, when I tell stories about parenting, um, depending on how old they are and where they are in their life and in their kind of journey of life, it
Hmm.
may be a little boring and not interesting, or it may be kind of compelling. But I'm going to share that because it's an act of vulnerability to say, hey, my daughter I had this pillow behind me that my daughter sewed. And sometimes when I'm doing Zoom facilitation, people will ask about the pillow. And of course, it's there by design because it's a conversation starter about a human element of my life that I'm really passionate about. My daughter
Hmm.
is a crazy person, and she's 11 and she's in a band, and it's pretty neat. And then people start to think, oh wait, so Michael's not just like this DEI nerd, but he also has a dad. And like, what 11-year-old? What do they do in San Francisco? What's an 11-year-old doing in a band? And it becomes fun and playful and curious. And I think there's some leaders that say, I don't feel like I have time to get into those personal details. But I think we're starting to see the data show that building trusting relationships improves productivity. So I think that there's a long tail benefit to spending a little bit of time saying, no, but like, what did you really do over the weekend? Or like, what are your hobbies? And gosh, I don't know anything about rowing or crew, or you and I both know mountain biking, but I'm at a
Hmm.
whole different level than you are. And we enjoyed that conversation in the past. So I think it makes it fun and interesting and just kind of humanizes things.
Yeah, it's creating a sensitivity towards other people's experiences
I
and
like
their
that.
culture,
Yeah, I like that.
um, and and the better any of us can get at that, the more fulfilling all of our relationships will be, right?
Yeah, and that fulfilling relationship. I mean, you're really onto something. If the relationship is fulfilling and there's trust, then when someone offers an idea and another person in the room, regardless of their power or title, can say, hey, you know what? I think we tried that 3 months ago and it didn't work. And when there's trust, that person feels comfortable raising their hand and saying, maybe I'm missing something here, but I don't think that's the best course of action. That's psychological safety in action. That's a living example of it. And the relationship inspires that. And wouldn't it be great if if as an organization or a team, we didn't make the same mistake over and over and over again, right? I don't know if you've
Mhm.
seen that with your clients, where clients feel like, hey, we're just getting bogged down. I mean, tell me a story about one of your clients in maybe one of these mission exercises where there were some aha moments.
Well, it's interesting. I think one of the aha moments, we had a client that we ran through a VVM vision values mission exercise, and it was interesting. They had about 5 or 6 stakeholders, and one of them was just fundamentally opposed to the exercise itself. And
Mm,
these are major stakeholders in the organization, and you could just tell from the onset that he did not really want to be there, or really had an understanding of why this was important. He just wanted to go make money, and and so getting him to finally buy into it, or at least accept the results of the exercise
sure.
based
Yeah.
upon the other team members, was an interesting it was an interesting journey. I think, thinking back on it, I probably could have done a better job of coaching him in terms of, some of the things that you've mentioned in terms of sharing data, and why this is actually important from a from the standpoint of of revenues, for example, or company retention, or any of the things that you can actually tie back to DEI as well. Which is like, if the culture is strong, it makes hiring that much easier. It makes retention that much better.
Oh,
It then
absolutely.
gets productivity up, and all of those things. And similarly, from a values, vision, mission, that's that starting point for building that culture. And so when you have a strong, aligned culture, and everyone knows, not only which direction that we're rowing, but why we're rowing that direction, it tends to keep everybody moving that same way, so that you're just that much more efficient.
Yeah, that's
Um,
really insightful, Stu. It's really insightful. At the idea at New Sincerity, when it comes to managing and understanding stakeholders and all of their different needs, is to try and find that common thread. Um,
mhm.
and I can understand in the nonprofit world, we have a lot of people that have a lot of heart. That's oftentimes why they're in the nonprofit world. They're certainly not in it for the higher salaries.
Not
and
usually, no.
and they and what they're looking to accomplish is to help as many people as they can. And oftentimes, what I've found is that I need to in some ways sometimes be a little bit of a voice of reason with nonprofit leaders that say, "Hey, we want to accomplish these 15 things this year." When I really think operationally, we've got the time and resources for five,
Hmm.
and that can be also be a difficult message to carry through, because it gets to this issue of burnout. And there's a lot of talk coming out of the pandemic, and a lot of nonprofits struggle with burnout because leaders are asking for more from their team than their team has the ability to give.
Hmm.
And that also is kind of what empowered and inclusive leadership excuse me, what empowered and inclusive leadership looks like is is being able to go to a leader and say, "Hey, I've got five things on my plate, and I think based upon our current goals, I've got time to do three of them. I could do
Hmm.
all five, but we can't go as deep. Which way do
Hmm.
you want to go?" And people may say to me, "Hey, that doesn't sound like DEI to me." But if we have a foundation of safety where people can say, "This is what I'm seeing, this is what's going on for me," um, I think psychological safety is a core tenet of an inclusive culture,
Hmm.
and a specific output for a very business driven leader would be the expression of raising their hand and saying, "Hey, I don't think we have time for all these things.
Right.
If Let's get back to the mission, and be honest about what we can accomplish."
Yeah, and it's interesting as you were saying that, I was thinking about just DEI in general, and how, in society we tend to try and tribe things out. We create our little ecosystems,
Sure.
and our little groups, right? So we have our favorite football teams that, the people in Denver can't stand the people in Seattle because of the football thing, and there's,
Uh,
and we break things down by all of these little segments. And if you're improving your inclusion, that can be applied to all of those kind of segments, and you just get this holistic kind of team that's able to just work more effectively. And I'm thinking about, somebody. So inclusion could theoretically be applied to kind of this the different levels within an organization. So you have upper management, and then you have, some like an intern. And if the team as a whole is very good at DEI, then that inclusion is going to happen, all in all aspects of those levels that we kind of self-assign.
yeah,
Have you seen that? Have you seen it work that way?
it's so true. It's so true. I mean, it really, when it comes from the top, It's much more impactful and lasting, and that's why that's why the work that we do is really centered on finding ways for senior leaders to adopt and express inclusive values, but to do so in a way that fits into a very, very full schedule. And culture change and culture transformation can be, at the enterprise level, it can be a 7-figure and 2-year exercise. And our engagements oftentimes much, much shorter. And I like to focus on small, measurable outcomes that come quickly.
Right.
Because there's a lot of people tend to think that DEI work and culture work hard to tie to business objectives, oftentimes disruptive because it can be highly, highly personal. And if we can actually define some outputs from work that's related to inclusive culture, and we can set some goals that are not meant to be the be all end all, because these are the lives of who we are as human beings. So there is an endpoint to this work. But if we can identify some KPIs that are related to inclusive culture and we can reach those goals, psychologically, it builds a feeling of success and connectedness. And that's it's like building a brand, right? It's creating that continuity and creating that momentum. I have on my shelf here in the office, I have tons and tons of books that I read from in college and grad school. And when I do trainings, I refer to all sorts of books and podcasts. I draw from a wide kind of international array of content, because I like to give people chances to get curious about learning about the different lives that are very different than theirs, and I want to give an opportunity to do that. And but I also have an understanding that if I were to say, hey, the key to success in inclusive culture here is for the leaders to read these 3 books, I know that that's probably not going to happen. And so I want to say, hey, let's set goals on a couple different talking points around a couple different articles or podcasts. And then, for example, could one of the best practices be brought into a meeting in the next week? And this is how we see success in education, creating sustainable, reachable goals.
Right.
Embedding the growth mindset so that if someone quote unquote fails, they just see it as a learning experience and they move forward. There's a lot of data around the success of those types of structures, like including growth mindset. So we try and bring that into the conversation. And oftentimes what we hear, which is very encouraging, is that people say, hey, this process was, I kind of thought it was going to be really hard and really tumultuous. And I like that feedback. And then I also say, hey, as a reminder, the work isn't done, and nor are the benefits that the organization is going to achieve. And then what we're hoping to hear is that, okay, well, Michael, where do we go next? And I say, do we want to look at inclusive marketing? Do we want to look at inclusion centered on recruiting or retention or onboarding, or, for example, a board? And it's super rewarding work for me.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear how you're coming at this from this perspective of it doesn't have to be torturous sort of work, and there are measurable outcomes that will create a positive benefit to one's organization or one's business, and really coming at it from that perspective where, there's some hard things we may talk about, or we may need to challenge ourselves a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's not only for the good of the kind of the bottom line, but also just the good of the cultural experience that we're able to bring to the table having this particular business.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so true. I think I mean, I mentioned I had this background in the counseling practice and doing that the work of psychotherapy with this multicultural focus. So I know what that very human-centered personal work is about. It's extremely challenging. And my work at New Sincerity is about understanding what we can hope to accomplish within the context of work. It's a very difficult balance to find. And when we have organizations where there are leaders, you mentioned a very resistant participant in one of your recent engagements, and I run into leaders that are not being authentic about their willingness to do the personal work, and that's something that I need to help the overall organization address. Right? We need to be extremely honest about folks within the organization that maybe their values don't align.
Right.
And there's a term in the industry called the toxic high performers. And this is something that we're starting to measure. There are people that don't have an inclusive mindset and how they live in the world, but yet they might contribute a great deal financially. And I think what we're starting to see in these two researchers from who published in MIT Sloan recently, and this work was featured in Adam Grant from Wharton and Brene Brown, who everyone is listening to now. She has an HBO special.
Yep.
And the key takeaway from their research is that there's actually a greater cost by retaining that toxic high performer, because they're disempowering and excluding so many different people within their team, group, and the larger organization.
Yep.
That there's actually an economic cost. And I would love to be able to reach that person and to get them to grow as a person, but I'm also a realist, and maybe collectively we can find ways for the organization to say, hey, our values and how we relate to people are more important than individual performance from someone who doesn't share those humanistic values.
Yeah, because they just come into a workplace and can just demolish the culture, even if they're a superhero when it comes to production or creativity or whatever the thing is that they do.
100%. Yeah, oftentimes it's the elephant in the room. And I will have senior leaders who, after building a relationship, then they say, so Michael, how do we deal with this individual situation?
Right.
And it can get really difficult. It really can get difficult. But I think that if we can, once again, building trust within the engagement and within these individual teams, we start to see it's like a knot loosening. We start to see people moving to a place of greater compassion and greater acceptance. And sometimes that means that some people realize, okay, I guess I don't fit within this organization anymore. And it's hard to see those. There's not a lot of transparency when you see those transitions, but if it's for the overall well-being of the people within the organization, there's long-term benefits, and the near-term benefits is obviously just the wellness of people and the fact that they want to get up every day and go to work or hop on Zoom and they're excited to be there. That's what we all would want for them, right?
Yeah. I know that a lot of this DEI stuff kind of happens behind the scenes, but are there any examples of companies that you have seen who've been a little bit more public about their approach to this that have done a great job?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So we've developed, and you're a marketer, so you understand the value of content, and we've developed content products that seek to actually bring it to into the public, both in terms of across the organization, but also to show these inclusive values to customers and clients. And one of the ways that we do that is through storytelling that we create with internal teams and other stakeholders. It might be a client, it might be a donor, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And video-based storytelling, right? We could have a YouTube video podcast. You have this podcast here as well, but we can create a loosely scripted conversation with people within the organization, and maybe they're talking to a donor, for example, and the flow of the conversation is about both the mission, but also this shared humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you began the conversation talking about snowing, and I mentioned the fact that we're both mountain bikers. These are things that we are experiencing that are a part of our lives, but they're not related to marketing. And yet we somehow know that, like, hey, if we have some things in common, when we start to uncover those, we'll probably discover more things that we have in common. So this is a way that we could tell a story about shared humanity with stakeholders connected to the organization, and we can share that with the world. It doesn't need to be a sales opportunity, and they don't, as I mentioned before, they don't need to be long, right? They can be these little vignettes. So video-based storytelling also pretty easy to do. Don't need a
Mm-hmm.
high production value. So a smaller nonprofit could create a video storytelling series with donors or clients, and they could create 6 or 8 of these things. It's evergreen content because it's people talking, and then it gets all sorts of different people involved, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun. So it becomes a team building and a marketing exercise. And I'm always trying to find ways for any content or experience that we design to be able to be used in different ways, because
Yeah.
it extends the value of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that a lot. And in fact, in the current hiring challenges that people seem to be experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
leading with culture and actually marketing for uh, for team members is becoming something that not only needs to happen, but the materials and all of the work that one does to tell those cultural stories then can then be repurposed to market for for business as well. So
So true.
this idea that culture is becoming and business culture is becoming more and more important, is not just to build and retain your team, but you can leverage that material outside of that exercise to actually use it to build your your donor base or your revenue base as well.
Yeah, Steve, that's really thoughtful, and I think it shows a lot of authenticity in how you work with your clients when you're thinking about what their investment in marketing, how could that be extended to other aspects of the organization to provide lots of different benefit. And what you're saying is getting me, it's making me think about this idea of talent and culture being the next competitive advantage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's what's coming up for me when you're talking about these strategic goals, is that if we can tell stories about the people within the nonprofit that are doing the work and delivering the service, it becomes a recruiting and retention tool, and then it gives people kind of an anchor back to the mission.
Mm-hmm.
There's just lots of really neat outcomes, and we've created lots of different video products. When I was running my agency, we didn't do quite as much video work, but certainly at the nonprofit that I was with, we did. And then I did event-based work and trained sales teams at the cybersecurity company. And the cybersecurity, very engineering driven, lots of straight white men within the organization. And when I was doing that training and in advance of a big event, I just needed to really be just really thoughtful and encouraging with folks that generally not extremely comfortable with informal conversations, and with that level of spontaneity. So there was an opportunity for us to, I don't know, just to dig into the human part of conversations with people that are coming from different experiences, and they performed extremely well at the conference. I was really
That's
happy
awesome.
to see it.
Yeah, it's really cool to see people kind of step up and many of us, particularly, I mean, I'm in that same boat as you in terms of you know getting into my mid 50s, cis white straight male dude, and we've been ingrained for our lives to not only have the privilege that we do, but also just how to talk in the workplace or how to talk to other people. And we can all learn to change, and we can all learn to be more inclusive and to be just better people all around through, getting to understand other people's experiences more effectively.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I've observed the enthusiasm that comes when people, when they practice the skill of active listening and asking open questions. They realize in some ways, hey, like if I ask a bunch of questions, I don't have to talk. I get to actually listen. And then when we feel heard as human beings, all sorts of great things happen, right?
Yeah.
It's really fun to just watch these things unfold. My challenge within the context of our training and our coaching work is to get senior leaders to realize that this is a productive use of the team's time. And that's
Right.
really where getting back to those business outcomes and sharing the data, I need to be very persuasive and say, hey, this is going to carry downstream benefits, and I'm going to show you why. And it ends up being a lot of fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it sounds amazing. So how can people find out more about the work that you do and learn more about DEI and how they can bring some of this to their
Yeah,
workplace?
thank you. I mean, I think so. My aim. I'm very much a connector on LinkedIn, and I'm building and growing a national and now kind of an international community of practitioners from all different identities and cultures and experiences. So, New Sincerity is easily found on LinkedIn. Our website is newsincerity.us, and can learn a little bit more about what we're doing there. But I encourage everyone to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you work in the nonprofit space, and if you're looking for ideas or have some questions about opportunities the organization might face, the best way to start a conversation is to find me on LinkedIn or find me at newsincerity.us, and to just schedule even a 15-minute exploratory call. There's we have really affordable engagements. I try and make the work accessible for executive directors and leaders of boards and nonprofit teams, because oftentimes money becomes a barrier to starting with the work. So although we do larger engagements for the startup world, we also I want to make sure that this work is accessible to nonprofits as well. So find me on LinkedIn and follow New Sincerity there, and then reach out to connect, because I love to connect people.
Yeah, for sure. That's so cool that you're doing this work and that you have the ability to serve, kind of anyone who's really looking to make a change in the way that they handle their culture in their business world. I love having these conversations, as you probably have heard, since I know that you're a listener on the show.
No, absolutely,
And
yeah.
one of the things I like to ask at the end of every episode is if there was one action that you'd like for people to take after listening to our show today, what would that action be?
Gosh, what a great question! And thanks to you and your community for investing in the conversations. It's a way of giving back, and it matters. It definitely matters. I guess if there was one thing that I'd like everybody to do, would be to simply commit to one action this week to get to know somebody from a different lived experience. Just simply that, and perhaps that would be a catalyst to create curiosity and ripple that forward through their organization or even through their personal life.
I love it. I would encourage everyone to do that. I'm going to put that on my list of to-dos here this week and
Awesome.
see who I can meet to kind of get to know them a little bit better and create a new relationship. Thanks so much for being on the show today, Michael. I really had a great time talking with you. Everybody go out and check out newsincerity.us. And thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks to you and Relish, dude. Take care.
Bye-bye. And there you have it, another great episode of Relish This. Thanks again for listening. You can find past episodes of the show at relishthis.org. And remember, if you liked what you heard today, please subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information on purpose marketing, grab your free copy of my book, Mission Uncomfortable: How Nonprofits Can Embrace Purpose-Driven Marketing to Survive and Thrive. Get your copy now at missionuncomfortablebook.com. Thanks again for listening. Come back next week, won't you?